clinical PhD scheme that we have operating across Northern England and Leeds, Manchester, Newcastle, Sheffield. Strange times. This is not how we imagined it, but there we are. So Katie's kind of done the etiquette. You'll have seen the format for this morning. I'm going to introduce a few other key people in a second, and then I'm going to run through some slides that we have just about the process. A little bit after that, we have Sunaina Best, who's one of our awardees, who's going to give you a brief presentation of her project and her thoughts on the process. And then probably the most important bit, and that's we'll open it up and also get really valuable opinions from lots of other people who are on the meeting. So on that note, I'm going to introduce Phil Quirk, who is, I can see, he's there, who is the director of the programme in Leeds. Alison Condliffe is on the meeting without video, but has just, I saw in the chat box, said hello to everyone.
Hi, everybody.
There we go. So verbal as well. Alison is directing the programme in Sheffield alongside the original director from Sheffield was Chris Newman, who has taken on a role as the Dean of the Faculty in Sheffield. So Alison has come in and brought great strength. And then Muzz, I'm not sure if Muzz is on the call yet, but Muzz Hanifa is from Newcastle. She's Welcome Senior Fellow. She's taken on more of the role now. Andy Fisher was the original director in Newcastle, and he's become clinical dean in Newcastle. So as ever, I suppose the 5-year transition, things have changed a little bit as we've gone through, and we've brought new people in, refreshed it, and yeah, we've evolved over the time. So so I think should we just get on? We'll get on into the slides. Like I said, the point of today as a launch, this is probably a little curtailed as a process compared to the normal sort of launch events we have. But I think the main bit is just to alert you to what the process will be, how we go through that, and still sort of recognize we're in this phase of getting the message out to try and encourage people to come and apply to the scheme and to see and recognize what we have to offer and to hope to benefit from it. So that's the welcome slide we've kind of done with. So if we move to the next slide. So I've introduced to you these were the 4 original directors. Now clearly Andy Fisher smiles all the time. I smile sometimes, but actually it's not true because Phil and Chris also smile a lot. The 4 of us got together probably now 5 or 6 years ago, probably even, about the inception of this and what it was that we wanted to achieve. Next slide. And it really hinged on this, and that is that individually we have some very good universities. Collectively, we have a great university. And it's that sort of virtual sense of one institution that really compelled us to do something we hadn't really done before. And that was to sort of put aside our individual institutional loyalties and recognize that if we worked together, we could create something that was far stronger in terms of a bid to the Wellcome Trust, because you know, at the outset, this was us writing a grant application to try and get the funds to run the program, but also far stronger in terms of what we can offer everyone as a training experience, and the important bit of bringing clinicians of all flavors through a PhD program and on towards intermediate fellowships and beyond. I think we all passionately feel that, you know, one of the best bits of the job, the most important bit of the job, is pulling through the next generation of clinical academics so that the north of England has a very strong profile. So if you look at the stats here, you can kind of see when you add up our 4 institutions, which we've abbreviated as N4, all of a sudden we start to knock on the door of Oxford, Cambridge, UCL. So we can start to offer compelling projects with really great supervisors that cross disciplines, that pull on one of the sort of mantras we have, that we access the best, not just the closest. There's no compromise. If you want to do a certain technique or apply a certain methodology to do your research, then we can do it because we've got the strength and the critical mass. So next slide. So very quickly to get stuck in, not going to spend too long. There's a few slides now about just the overview of how we're going to do things. So today is the launch. So that's what we've termed stage 1, and we have then stage 2. So stage 1 is trying to assemble a group, cadre of trainees who we think have really good promise. And so we look to assemble a crowd of about 20 or so individuals where we're selecting quite heavily on quality of CV, quality of individual. We don't really want to prejudge things at this stage about your project as you may perceive it. But rather we want the smartest people, the brightest minds, so that we can help you put together the most compelling project, mindful of what I've just said about the strength across all the institutions, which perfectly legitimately you may not be fully aware of yet. So we get into November, stage 1 closes. The application for stage 1, as I say, is heavily based around a CV and a bit of a statement about what it is you're looking to achieve and why the PhD process is right for you. So once we've completed that stage 1 process, we then enter the second stage with about the cohort of about 20. So this is what we sort of loosely termed the academy. And then stage 2 really is about getting you together with the right PIs, the right supervisors, to build the right project for you so that you can put something together that's really exciting. So that then takes us into next year, so into February. So you can see we give you plenty of time. You've got plenty of time now before November to get the first bit of an application in. So we will run these sorts of events again. We'll put this video on the web so people can see it. So we can really get a big cohort of people in for the first phase. Then the stage 2, you've got the second half of November, December, January, half of February to get the application together. Now the stage 2 application is actually very similar to what operates at MRC or charities, and used to operate nationally when Wellcome ran their national scheme rather than devolving it. So then at that point, it's really the application is hinged on what we'll come back to later, I suspect, and that's the sort of principles of person, place, and project. So after you've submitted in February, we then go through a process of peer review and selection to shortlist people for interview. And we look to interview in about April. And then on the back of the interviews, where we interview probably about 10. So that 20 or so go down to about 10 for interview. And then we select our candidates for the Wellcome scheme, where we have 5 slots by and large to go onto the Wellcome funding. Now I'm speaking slightly out of sync because Katie's already advanced it onto the other bit there, which is about MRC. And this is a really important point for us in the academy and what we're trying to do across our 4 centres. Yes, this is about the Wellcome scheme. Yes, this is funded by Wellcome. And yes, we have 5 places. But actually, there is a much bigger initiative as part of this. And that is to actually get people's heads up so we can also maximise the number of awards we get from all the other schemes. The main one there being MRC as the big government funder, but also NIHR is another big government-based funder. And then all the AMRC, the charities, so be it CRUK, BHF, arthritis charities, etc., etc. For us as program directors, we are as proud of people who go off and get fellowships from other funders as we are of the people we fund on the Welcome program, because it's really just getting you the opportunity to do the PhD to the best possible, in the best possible way. That's the most important bit for us. So I guess the key message is we wouldn't want you to look at this process now thinking, oh my God, there's all these people, they're going to take 20, it goes down to then 10 at interview, and there's only 5 places, so this isn't worth my time because the return is low. That's not the case, because when you factor in the opportunities you get to have better applications going everywhere else, I think taking part in this process actually means you stand a pretty good chance, if you stick at it, of getting onto a PhD fellowship somewhere, somehow. That's the most important bit. Next slide, please. So I think there's a bit of reiteration coming up now, just to repeat. Path to stage 1. Stage 1 closes, date for your diary, 11th of November. We have to have all that in. We will get word out to you as quickly as we can. There's a bit of peer review that takes place of obviously the applications. And this is what we're terming then after that. And we've selected the 20 or so people to work with as our academy for the next phases and to help you with the applications elsewhere. Next slide there is, and as I've mentioned, the whole point of that stage 1 is really to start out on the process around your CV, having a few ideas, talking to some people, getting the first ideas you might have for what it is you want to do, before we then go on to stage 2. And then the path to stage 2, as I've alluded to. Next slide. We close there, as I say, in February. So just to reiterate, you've got plenty of time. We will have the event that we've got scheduled for the 7th of December. I think you would all cut us some slack in the current environments. That's what we're hoping to do. There may be some wobble, but the bottom line is we try and get people together. Now, in the past, that's been face-to-face stuff, but even virtually, actually, there's lots we can do. So it's about teaming you up with the right people. And probably at this point, I would just emphasize the value of having, while we might be running the program this year from Manchester, we've rotated it year on year across the different sites. The real value here is the fact you've also got your local program teams and directors who can offer you advice. And so, as you can tell, the 4 directors at the outset and then the people who've also joined us, we actually know each other pretty well. So we know our institutions and the partner institutions pretty well. So we can offer you really very good advice about how you best build your applications that stretch across the whole of the N4, not just the institution you might be applying from. Next. So again, then we've got that process. We give you as much notice as we can for interviews. It's as much, if not more, notice as you get from other funders in the run-up to April. And then the next bit, we fund up to 5. So just a little bit about the interviews. So the interviews, very standard process. It's a panel where we have an external chair, and we've built the panel up to about 8 people now, plus the external chair. So you get put through your paces in much the same way as happens at MRC or NIHR or any of the other funders. So Katie's just the bit in blue there about other funders is what I've alluded to about the whole ethos of trying to maximize our success across the whole patch and across all the funders. Again, mindful of that bit, really what we're trying to do is pull you through towards intermediate fellowships and to become clinical academics, regardless of who funds this first doctoral phase. So that's a quick tour through the process. Very happy to pick this up later on when we have probably, as I say, the most important bit, and that's the sort of Q&A session after Sunaina. So there we go, 20 applicants in at stage 1. We shortlist down to about 10 or 12 and we award 5. But please take home the message that we're also helping you go to other funders. That's me. Now, I've probably gone through that too quickly. So what we programmed for Sunaina at 11 o'clock, is she here with us yet, Katie?
No, not yet. We're still waiting for her to join. So if anyone has got any questions, or if any of the other directors want to add anything.
Yeah. So I was going to say, yeah, Alison and Phil and Muzz, if she's on the call now, chip in.
But I have sat on the Clinical Research Training Fellowships Programme for the MRC for 4 years. And just to emphasise that an application to 4WardNorth can certainly be submitted at the same time to applications elsewhere, or sequentially. They are very comparable in their format, in their stature, and I think that the quality of the people we've had applying to us is such that people have sort of sometimes got these fellowships before they apply to 4WardNorth or after. So I think that it should be regarded as sort of integral process. And we are very welcoming to help you with applying elsewhere as well, and so will any potential supervisors be. So this is part of a broader picture, and our real aim is to encourage people into clinical academia, not just sort of here, but in the policies.
Oh, so just to add, that many people make the mistake of coming into this with what they think is a fully formed project because they've been working with somebody else before, and they feel very attached and they feel that they're totally committed to that individual project. Now that can be a mistake, because one of the objectives of the fellowship program that we've got is to give you access to the best people in each of the universities. So that means that really we'd like to see some flexibility in the projects, and to discuss with the people that you're thinking about developing a local project with, who else can add value. So don't come in with 4 supervisors from your own institution. We want to see you taking advantage of the north of England and all of its facilities. And we found that to be really helpful with some of our local people who've been lucky enough to get these fellowships. So do think more widely than your local institution. Do think what opportunities the north of England gives you, because that will be advantageous if we see that in the application. I mean, Neil, do you want to add anything to that?
I think the only thing I would say is the comment you've made before, Phil, that that sort of geographical joining up is also mirrored by interdisciplinarity, and that Phil is very experienced from ref panels, the process whereby research quality gets judged in all the universities in the UK. And Phil sat on those panels and very rightly says that actually outputs tend to get graded higher for interdisciplinary work. It sort of has more impact. It has more meaning behind it. And so that's sort of in the spirit of what we're putting together, that spread across geography and the spread across supervisors, and the sort of with that, the introduction of people from different disciplines who think slightly differently, all tends to make for better, more impactful research with better outcomes. So it's that better catapult for your career.
So Neil, there's a question on the chat about supervisors being predefined within the academy, or whether we can involve supervisors who are staff members out with that. And I just wondered if you wanted to just talk to that.
So that's a really good point, and it's a really good point for 2 reasons. Firstly, I'm on my iPad, so I am relying on someone else to tell me what comes in on the chat channel in case I miss it. And again, I think everyone, you know, Phil and Alison chip in because you're as experienced in this as I am. I'll explain the process and then you can probably see why we are where we are. So when we applied to the Wellcome Trust for the scheme, as I said, we were writing a grant. And inevitably, that's a very competitive process. And it's the reason why the Midlands, as an example, doesn't have access to this scheme and didn't have a successful application. So it was super competitive. And inevitably, as a grant, we had to assemble a team of people across our 4 institutions that wowed the international review panel at Wellcome as great supervisors, also mindful of covering the 4 institutions, also mindful of covering a wide range of disciplines. So inevitably that grant application process was a little contrived. So what's happened over the period is that we very much welcome supervisors from out with those who were named on the Wellcome application and who would appear on the website as sort of exemplar lead supervisors. So yes is the short answer to having supervisors and from outside. The longer answer to that is the important bit is those people we have been named because of the quality of what they do. And unequivocally, when we are making selections, as with the national panel, the person, place, project bit, part of the place, part of your ability to do the project is reflected in the quality of the supervisory team that you build. And so to pick up on what Phil just said about just questioning yourselves about whether you're coming in with a predetermined pet project that actually is before you've really thought about it and what's on offer to you. The brutal reality is the same extends to supervisory relationships. Now that's quite a tough message, but it's a real one that you need to hear because it operates across all panels.
So just to add to that, I mean, when you're looking for a supervisor, you're looking for somebody who has an outstanding scientific record, because at least that way you can be certain that they're going to be at the forefront of their field. You're also looking for their network. So it's really important that you get the best network possible. And that's why we like supervisors from multiple institutions, because if they're multidisciplinary, so I'm a pathologist, but if we involve an immunologist or we involve a statistician and we involve a biochemist, then I've got 4 different networks for that young PhD student to access. This is also a unique stage in your academic education, because you're going to get your 3 years of learning science, and you want to learn from the best, and you want to learn from people in multiple institutions, because they'll be able to solve your problems. I mean, the first job for you is to solve your own problems, but often you won't be able to do that, and therefore you want to really access the best brains and the best kit and the people who actually know what's going on at the forefront of the field. And all of that light shines down on you and gives you a unique opportunity, because in the future, you're going to be going for your own grants and your own intermediate fellowships, and you really need to have the backing of these large networks. And they also promote you. You go to meetings, if we have any meetings in the future with COVID, you go to meetings and they introduce you to the other stars in the field. And so it immediately gives you this rocket launch. Whereas if you've just taken 4 NHS consultants and you put them down as your supervisors, then okay, they can access you into a clinical network, but you're not really going to get the best science. And this is really about helping you to achieve the best publications to set you up for a fantastic intermediate fellowship and ultimately a career. So really do look for A, the best, B, people in multiple institutions, because they each have their own networks, but also they have access to state-of-the-art equipment, which is really very valuable. I mean, we've had fantastic relationships across the institutions, and our young CTRFs have had great benefit from linking up and getting different people's views. I've
forgotten to mention, I should also mention, we have partnership with the Crick Institute based in London outside King's Cross, which gives us access to that network. Our link to the Crick is through Peter Ratcliffe, who happened to win the Nobel Prize last year. So there is a certain quality threshold that we can bring to things. So I mean, that's just amazing to be knocking about with that level of quality. But what we would also say is that's one example. And if you have a compelling reason to link with something else, so Ms. Hanifer from Newcastle has incredibly strong links with the Sanger Institute and the Genome Campus that's at Hinxton Sanger. It's an amazing resource. So again, it's about, you've worked out what the question is you're trying to answer, and then it's about building the very best around you to actually answer that question. I'm gonna also say, Phil, the bit that's engraved on my mind from, I think it was the first year that Phil made a comment that is really powerful. For those of you who are doing clinically orientated projects, clinical research where you're building a cohort, one of the magnificent opportunities you have by having institutions joined up is you don't just have an experimental cohort where you are primarily based, but you have access to a validation cohort in one of the other institutions or via one of the other institutions. It's a really important point. So often you see nice research projects involving a clinical cohort that begin to answer a question. You will get some clues, but the fundamental principle is that you then must go off and validate that in a second cohort. That's actually quite often difficult to put together at a doctoral phase, but we have opportunities because of the geography of doing that in ways that perhaps other places don't have.
Sunaina's joined us now, Neil, if you want to introduce Sunaina.
Hello, Sunaina. You're putting me on the spot now. I'm going to struggle to remember which year you got funded in.
So I'm coming to the end of year 2.
It's all become a blur. So Sunaina's one of our awardees, based in Leeds, clinical genetics by background, very strong CV. Now, so actually, you should introduce a little bit about yourself as well before you start with your, a presentation about. So some of the backstory of where you've worked, where you've come from, because I know you've moved around a little bit and been successful everywhere you've been. So you introduce yourself.
Sure. So hi everybody. I'm Sunaina. I did my medical degree at UCL in London, and I intercalated there in human genetics. I then did the academic foundation program with a 4-month block in clinical genetics, and that's really like cemented my desire to do this as a career. Then did an academic clinical fellowship down in London and managed to do a genomics master's during that time, which was funded through the 100,000 Genomes Project, if you've come across that. And then I moved up to Yorkshire for my clinical genetics training, did just over a year of that, and now I'm out of program doing this PhD.
Great. Sunaina, I've made you a co-host, so okay. You should be able to share your screen, I think.
I don't have any other, is that it there?
Oh yeah, perfect.
Okay,
yeah,
perfect. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about, I've mentioned some of my background already and a little bit about my project and just a few bits of advice as you guys start this application process. So this is my very long-winded PhD title. I'm primarily based at the University of Leeds, and my main supervisor is Professor Colin Johnson, who's a specialist in ciliopathies, a group of inherited genetic diseases. So that's my background. I've already gone through there. So my project is really focused on genetic variant interpretation. So a variant is a change in a DNA letter when we compare to the human reference normal genome. So each of us has about 3 billion letters of DNA and each have 4 to 5 million DNA variants, so changes to the reference. And with modern sequencing technologies, it's now become very easy for us to generate huge volumes of data, and we're now able to offer whole exome and whole genome sequencing in the clinic. Unfortunately, our tools to interpret the changes we find are not as strong as our tools to generate the sequence. And at the moment, about 20% of variants that we find in disease-causing genes get classified as variants of uncertain significance. So we don't have enough evidence to definitely say that they're doing harm, or enough evidence to say that they're benign and just part of our normal individual variation. So I've seen that this is a huge problem for patients. When we deliver these uncertain results, they can cause huge amounts of anxiety and means we can't act on them clinically. So I've been really driven to try and improve strategies to understand the genetic changes we find to be able to offer more to patients in the clinic. So I would argue, as we're entering this generation genome, which is very high on the agenda of the Chief Medical Officer, that being able to understand the changes we find is a great priority, definitely in genetics, but across the whole of mainstream medicine. So I'm focusing on two groups of genetic conditions. The main one I'm working on is called ciliopathies. So these are genetic conditions related to changes in an organelle called the primary cilium, and this projects off the surface of almost every cell type and is involved in cell signaling and homeostasis. And inherited defects in cilia cause about 30 different genetic conditions, which can have a huge range of organ systems involvement, as you can see on the right. The most severe is called Meckel-Gruber syndrome, which you can see on the left, and that's a lethal condition during embryonic development. And about 40% of patients with these conditions remain genetically unsolved despite having comprehensive genomic tests, and lots of them have variants of uncertain significance in relevant genes, which we need to have tools to interpret better. So one of the features of ciliopathies is inherited retinal dystrophy, so conditions like retinitis pigmentosa. So I'm also studying patients with those conditions in order to be able to reach a bigger patient group. So the first part of my project has been trying to do some functional variant interpretation in the gene called TMEM67, and inherited defects in this gene cause a range of ciliopathies, including that Meckel-Gruber syndrome I just showed you. So I'm trying to model 10 TMEM67 variants. So I've chosen some that we know are definitely damaging, some that we know are definitely benign and just part of our natural individual variation, and 5 variants of uncertain significance, which were all found in patients with Meckel-Gruber syndrome from our local patient cohort. So I am trying to look at the effect on cilia of introducing these variants into a knockout cell line, which I've developed using this exciting new tool called CRISPR-Cas9, which allows us to do genome editing. So you can see on the right-hand side at the bottom, this is a high content imaging picture of cilia that I've stained for in gold. In the middle, you can see my wild type human retinal pigment epithelial cells with lots of lovely cilia projecting from them. On the right-hand side, you can see a heterozygous knockout. So one copy has been damaged using my CRISPR tool. And you can see there are some cilia there, but definitely not as many. And on the left, I have my biallelic knockout, where there's hardly any functional cilia at all. So I'm going to be reintroducing bacterial plasmids containing my variants of interest and seeing if we can restore cilia function and cilia number. And if they're restored, that suggests that the variants aren't doing damage. And if they aren't, then it suggests they are. So I was just at the point of doing that when COVID hit and we went into lockdown. So that's my big next step when I get back into the lab. So we're actually doing this in a collaboration with Professor Ollie Black's group at University College Dublin, and they're doing parallel modelling of the same variants in C. elegans worms. So hopefully we should have 2 lines of nice functional evidence to say whether these variants are definitely damaging or not. And we can hopefully learn some useful tools to take this forward to other genes to reach more patients. So the other part of my project, which has become much more dominant since we went into lockdown, is trying to diagnose patients entered to the 100,000 Genomes Project with primary ciliopathies. So I don't know if you've heard much about it, but the 100,000 Genomes Project was launched in 2012 as a hybrid research and clinical project, offering whole genome sequencing to patients with rare diseases and cancers. So I've been looking at the 83 patients recruited with primary ciliopathy syndromes. Only 10 have been reported as solved by the project itself. And through extensive searching of known genes, candidates, I have been able to solve 34 so far and hope to be able to solve some more. So this has been a great thing to do during lockdown because I can do it completely from my computer at home. So that's been nice, nice change from the lab work. So thinking about what advice I would give you as you're coming towards your application. So I would think about a bigger picture problem first, and then focus it down to a question that you might be able to realistically deliver within the space of a 3-year PhD. And if I look back to my application now, I think I was very overambitious as to what I could achieve, but it's great to start with a bigger picture. So my bigger picture was wanting to help to improve variant interpretation strategies, and then I focused it down to patients with these rare groups of disorders. I would really use your networks and reach out to contacts and collaborators from juniors all the way through to professors. You'll be surprised how willing people are to help, and I feel like the world has slightly shrunk since we've entered this more virtual system. So for my 100,000 genomes work, my main collaborators are now in Southampton, but there are lots of very clever people all over the place who I'm sure are more than willing to give you help and advice. I would keep your eyes open to online resources and online courses. Here's some of the ones that I've been using in my PhD, and most of them are free and very, very good. I don't know if it's controversial to say this, but I would definitely consider allocating at least part of your project that's COVID friendly, so you won't get totally stuck if your lab goes into lockdown. I know some of my colleagues who are completely wet lab based have found this time very difficult. So maybe consider allocating at least part of it that could be data research, for example. And I would really keep focused to the person project place model, both in your applications and in your interviews. It's a really nice formula that I think worked well as a structure for me. So I'd like to thank my supervisors, my colleagues, collaborators and trainers, and the 4WardNorth Academy for funding me and looking after me through all this time. And I wish you all the best with your applications. Happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Thanks, Sunaina. If you stop, there we go.
So I was just about to say the same. So questions for Sunaina. That's a good comment about COVID-friendly projects.
Yeah, I don't want to be too pessimistic. Like, I hope we can get back to normal soonish, but I've been out of the lab for 6 months now, and it's going to be a while till we're back to normal. So just keeping it in the back of the mind in case things get worse.
Yeah, no, I think that would be generic thought, wouldn't it, about any bit of research that we were now thinking about. I mean, it's true for all of us. Like you say, you don't want it to be too pessimistic, but who knows? Questions for Sunaina? Come on, who's gonna break the ice? If you put your hand up, Katie, you shout out. So Phil's got a question.
So how did you feel about the process, Sunaina, as you went through it? Which bits did you enjoy? What did you get most value from in terms of the interactions with us all?
If I'm completely honest, I found the beginning really quite intimidating because I arrived in Manchester for one of the launch events, having only just moved up to Leeds and having no network in the north at all, and felt really overwhelmed at the idea of putting together this team. But Colin, my main supervisor, was in your pack of approved supervisors, and I was able to put together a team from there. And then Neil helped me put me in contact with some people in Manchester who have continued to be really helpful. So I wouldn't say that if you don't know the right people now, you don't have time to meet them or put it together before application window.
That's true across, I think that's true for any clinician of any flavour going into a PhD project or a spell of research, isn't it? It's very different from what you do day to day clinically. And I think the trick is to throw yourself into it.
And I would talk to the junior people in those groups as well. I think as great as it is to talk to professors, talking to the PhD students or the master's students will give you a better flavour of what it's actually like to be in that lab, which is important to you.
I'm just, before I forget, I'm going to make a comment based on, we've got a bit of feedback, just based on what you said. So could people pop on mute if they're not speaking? About the engagement with other people, not just the supervisors. I think one of the things we set out to achieve at the start, and I think it has certainly worked in places and for some projects, is actually teaming you up not just with great supervisors, but recognizing there's great intermediate fellows around across the North as a cohort of individuals. So people who would be the next phase for you. And actually some of them have joined in the supervision, and actually quite often, or on occasion, led lots of the supervision. And I think some of that's been really fruitful. And I think that's great, because it's great for you as the PhD. You've got someone who's right at the cutting edge, intermediate fellow, a Welcome Dale or whatever. But also it's great for them in that it helps them get into this with a really bright PhD student. And there's usually a very strong chemistry. So you just made the comment and it just reminded me.
And sometimes these people are less intimidating if you think your question's a bit basic or stupid. So I quite often email postdocs saying, how do I do this on the command line, or this bit of code doesn't run, and they've all been really, really helpful.
Sanaya, thank you very much for your talk. I was just going to ask you about your collaboration with Dublin, how that arose. And it sounds as if that gives your project a whole different aspect and a really broad strength. So I just wondered if you could give us a few words about that.
So the collaboration with the Dublin group actually was facilitated by my supervisor. So he was in touch with Professor Black's group and realized that we had a parallel system for variant interpretation. So I contributed the gene list through collaboration with the clinical scientists in Leeds. So I've come up with the variants, and together we've then come up with a strategy to interpret them. So it's definitely been mutually beneficial. I think, honestly, they have found the C. elegans branch a lot easier than we've found the human cell line branch. So they're further ahead than we are, but they've also got back into the lab earlier. But together, I think it should make a really nice functional paper about how to tackle these difficult variants.
So I think that it just gives a really good feel of how you can incorporate complementary strategies that are very different, but actually really strengthen each other into a proposal.
Yeah.
That's something for everybody to achieve.
No, definitely. I think it's really important, but answers a very focused question in multiple ways.
So I'm going to jump in. We want more questions from people who've joined the call. But I'm going to jump in because Katie alerted me to one of the other partnerships we have, but also it fits with what Alison has just been saying about complementary techniques, and that is that we have a partnership with the Turing Institute and the emerging importance with data science and how you handle large data sets. So the Turing is the country's national data institute, and it's virtual to some extent in that it's people everywhere are Turing fellows in all of our institutions. So it brings together a cohort of individuals with great research expertise in data science, artificial intelligence, machine learning. And that's obviously very much de la mode, but also there's great expertise in there. The things that sometimes sound a bit more mundane, like statistics, but actually things that are fundamentally important about making sure your research is right at the highest quality and valid. And certainly as you get into complex stats, it's serious stuff. So we have a partnership with the Turing, just to flag up alongside the likes of the Crick. Katie, coordinate questions. Come on, we must have some questions. Anything off the chat, Chantal?
There's nothing on the chat.
Can I add something about the project in terms of considerations? I think you know, we've discussed really good points, but something to bear in mind for people who are going to think about projects is to think of how you can have stop starts, like have projects that, you know, are where if you need fresh tissues from human or whatever, or, you know, in vivo experiments that you can do in a short period of time, and then you can, you know, leverage fixed material, you know, have contingency plans in addition to sort of like then analyze the data. That's probably quite helpful for moving forwards in this climate, because I don't think it's going to change very quickly back to how we were before.
Is that any questions or no? Right, so let's move it on. So Naina, you're off the hook.
Thanks, everyone.
You're going to leave us or stay?
I'm going to go.
Okay, she's off. All right.
Bye.
So, cheerio. Nice to see you.
You too.
So the next phase to move into, that's Muzz, who's just joined us. Who we introduced you, Muzz, on your behalf at the start.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone.
You're welcome. It was all good. So when we were talking about the crick and the partnership, I flagged up, well, and Turing now as well, but also these aren't restrictive, and I just mentioned the great relationship you've got at Sanger and as another example of how we can get partnerships with the best places for all the right reasons. So let's, I do want some input now from everyone, because I want some questions and some of your concerns or queries, or you heard just then, you know, the comment that it can be a bit daunting. We've all been here. We can still remember, just for those of us who are a bit older, but we have all been here, so we know what it's like, and it's actually exciting. So there's no question that would be too daft or too trivial. So come on, let's have some questions. We'll have a bit of Q&A, as I say. We've had a few comments, Alison and Phil, on the way. So Muzz, if you have any other comments, fire them in. But let's get back to the sort of thinking about what you might want to put together, how you might go about it, what I mentioned about person, place, project, anything that you've heard so far that's kind of surprised you or raised other questions. So come on, let's have them.
So there's one on the chat. Hold on. Sunaina mentioned a list of approved supervisors. How do we find this?
Well, very quickly, that was my comment earlier about that. When we apply to Wellcome, we have to have a list of supervisors. So I would regard them less as approved, as more as exemplar supervisors now. And we're very welcoming of any supervisor that meets a quality threshold. That you know, we want the best thing for your project. So the information that's on the website is there. For those who are exemplars that we started out with, and I've added to a little bit, but please don't take that as you have to have one of those. It's about building the right people of the right quality. Phil made a very good comment actually before about assessing the quality of the people you're going to. So when you're thinking about supervisors, PubMed is there, you can see what they've published. But you also want to know what other grants they hold, who's in the lab, are the postdocs about, what's their track record. These are actually quite easy things to assess. And again, it can feel a bit daunting because you might think, well, who am I to be doing this? But actually, it's really important. And you can ask people, you know, who else is in your group? Because it's absolutely, you know, important for you to be doing this. Sorry, Phil.
So you're going to spend 3 years with these people. So you really also need to make certain the personal chemistry is right, because you don't want to work for a beast for 3 years. You really want somebody that you can get on with, empathize with, and work with. The other aspect is that, you know, how many students have they supervised? So if somebody's supervised 20 successfully through to their PhDs, then you're going to be a much better bet as a supervisor than somebody who hasn't done anybody. So you can have a mixture of levels of supervisor, but you really do need somebody on that CV who has got a good chunk of successful supervision. So you can be certain, the worst thing that can happen is you can spend 3 years and not get your PhD. So you really want to increase your levels of certainty. And so we will be looking at these supervisors, and you want to ensure there's at least one of them that is incredibly solid. And we'd like to see 2, you can have somebody young, because sometimes the youngsters are really on top of the ball, got the most energy and can be really helpful to you. But we don't want 3 young people who have not supervised anybody, because that's not good for you. Ultimately, we have to answer to the Wellcome Trust for the program, but we also need to ensure that you, if we select you, have the best opportunity to get that, because the worst thing for us is somebody not completing their PhD. So please look at those supervisors very carefully, and also go and talk to the other PhD students they've got, because they'll be able to tell you what they're like, and they'll be able to tell you what their foibles are, and we all have foibles. But hopefully, a bit of common sense, you can choose some good supervisors who've got enough experience to ensure that you're going to be able to move forward.
Okay, another one around, for applicants who are completing ACFs, do you encourage people to move straight from ACF research projects into the PhD? It was interesting to hear that predefined projects are not necessarily advantageous, but what would you advise about taking forward ACF outcomes?
While other people think, I think so inevitably there's a heavy bias of people who apply to us who have ACFs or doing ACFs, and it's not because there's anything particularly clever necessarily about the ACF. It's just that bright people have tended to, the research-minded bright people have tended to acquire ACFs along the way. I think for me, the fundamental bit is the hallmark of really good people are people who are bright with ideas, but when they take something on, they deliver. It's that sort of benchmark gives you confidence that when they take on a PhD, they'll deliver. They'll get something out of it that's really good. And so if you've taken on, take it back a stage and intercalated, and you've done something, you've presented it, it's been written up, you're an author on a paper somewhere, it shows that you've not only started something, but it's got finished. So if you become, even case reports in this sense, even if they're off on a totally different topic, you've seen something, you've done something about it, you've delivered it, it's there, it's marked, it's on your CV. And the same for me is true of your ACF, that if you take on an ACF and you have research time, you've done something with it and it's delivered. So I would say that's probably the most important factor for me. After that, as Phil said, don't feel wedded to what you're doing. It's about coming up with the right question for you to go after, that you really want to go after, with the right people. And it's the thing that you think, this is going to launch the next phase of my career.
Unmute myself. Another question. How much detail do we need to write about any potential project itself on the stage 1 application form? I believe the vision statement is a page of A4 for reasons for wanting to do a PhD and project ideas.
I don't want to, so other people chip in, Phil, Muzz, Alison?
So on the vision statement, we need to know, we want to be able to help you. So when you come up to have a chat with us about your ideas, we're there to try and tell you what we think are good and should be developed, who you can develop them with, and what we think are bad. So you want ideas that are now tractable. So the techniques exist that will enable you to answer these questions. It needs to be impactful, so you want it to be important for the population and healthcare in general. So you need to be giving us the areas that you're interested in, and then what we'll try and do is send you to chat to the appropriate people in any of the 4 institutions. So on that board, there'll be somebody from each of the 4 institutions, and we hopefully, having a lot of experience with our own localities, should be able to say, well, in Leeds, this person's got that interest, you go and have a chat to them. And in Newcastle, Muzz will tell you, well, actually, there's this person who might be really complementary. I'd go and get in contact with them. So that vision statement is around about us understanding you and your motivations and dedication, but also it's for us to be able to help you to get in and put you in the best position. Because we don't care where you're coming from, which university you're at, etc. What we're interested in is getting 5 really good PhD students with good projects in good places with good supervision, who are going to actually make their PhDs fantastic.
I might just sort of add a few of my kind of like own personal thoughts on how to kind of like go about preparing for the next stage. It's worth sitting down and thinking about what areas you like. It's worth kind of like reaching out and trying to think of people around you or within the 4WardNorth program that you might want to work with. And also echoing Neil's comment earlier, find out from the people who are in that lab how it is, you know, looking at their track record as, you know, mentioned before, but also, you know, speaking to the team members. And then you know, the vision is quite broad, as Phil said. This is kind of like where, you know, it helps us to kind of guide you to meet people as well. So it's an element of like the project, the place, and in this case, it's not just your organization, but the other 4WardNorth organizations. But I think fundamentally, it's the person, because this is a fellowship. It's about investing in a person. And think of your CV and what you can do to kind of like enhance it, so that you try to kind of like prepare yourself and give yourself the best chance really to get a fellowship. That's my thought. I think there's another question on chat. Katie, are you going to read it out?
Yeah. So this is from Georgina from Manchester Cancer Research Centre. So I'm coming at this from a slightly different perspective from working in recruitment and training at the Manchester Cancer Research Centre. Practically through our broader engagement with clinicians, how best should we be signposting them to this scheme? Would contact with available supervisors be a good first port of call for interested candidates? We'd be happy to promote widely at MCRC.
We disseminate through the faculty. So I'm going to talk locally about Manchester for a second, but we disseminate through the Fellowship Academy in the faculty. But I know that the processes are very, very similar in Sheffield, Leeds, and Newcastle. So we're here. We've publicised it. There's a website. It goes out throughout all of our institutions. It's mail shot, goes out to all the ACFs, and as wide as we can disseminate it, then people have to apply. You know, there's no secret about who the program directors are in local institutions. So then it's about the stage 1 application, which I think, as we've all said, is about strength of CV. And I think Muzz and Phil have made really good comments on that. There are no banana skins there we're laying out for you. So in terms of that page of vision statement, it's exactly as Phil and Muzz were saying about us then being able to try and work with you to help you. It's kind of difficult. You can't really write anything in there that would sort of bar you from being selected. It's genuinely about what it is that you think you might want to do. I think Muzz just made some really interesting comments, and just again, it sort of stimulates your own thoughts. So there is something about trying to identify a research area that has longevity to it. Because again, if you do something, it's most likely to have big impact if it's a big chunky topic that's got some longevity. So it's not really playing politics per se, but you should certainly be looking at project areas and thinking of broad areas that are actually, well, this is still going to be a really hot topic in 5 years' time. This is right at the cutting edge. You know, in that regard, that was one of the motivations as program directors as to why we wanted to engage with the Turing Institute and data science, because, you know, this AI revolution isn't going away. Now, it's not that every project has to have this, but we ought to be thinking that we need to encompass this and allow you these opportunities.
I think it's important to just emphasize that this is a really broad church, and we're not looking for a specific project or a specific type of project. And that we're very open to projects that are hard lab research. We're very open to projects that are predominantly data-based or AI-based, but we're also very open to projects that are based on clinical cohorts, because those are a tremendous strength. So I don't think that there is anything that you should be afraid to put in as an idea. If we think it's a terrible idea, but you're a great person, then we'll say, well, we think you're a great person and we really want to support you, but have you thought about perhaps redirecting in this way? Have you thought about encompassing you know, a broader project by bringing in some other aspects to this interesting idea that you have? Because as it is, it's a little too narrow. So don't be afraid to put things in a vision statement, because we can help you develop them.
I'll add a few bits and pieces as well from kind of my own personal views of this. It's sometimes easier to sort of like look at the end of the clinical research training fellowship and say, what are the kind of like ideal outcomes from it? From my perspective, you as the applicant, from the funder's perspective, and from the kind of like, you know, research area, etc. And then work backwards. That sort of like helps you see whether you can get to the goal that you want and to the place that where you want to be. And this is about training. So, you know, giving you the opportunity to sort of like learn research techniques, etc., etc. So think about that as well. But there's also the output element in terms of publications and the research findings and where that takes you further. A second thing that's probably quite important in terms of, you know, it's basically like sometimes not having had an opportunity, or you may, let me rephrase this. So essentially, don't think that this is just for ACFs and that they've had time to do research or whatever. Anyone can apply for it. And you're not expected to be able to like write the whole project and know where the research field that's amazing or know everything. That's what the academy tries to help you, you know, towards. But it's important that and that's why I think the supervisory team is quite important, because you do need to be nurtured. You know, one can't expect a research training fellow applicant to sort of like know everything, know exactly where the science is going, know what the papers that are potentially impactful that can come out from that research. So working together and being nurtured in this process is very important. And the other thing I want to mention is you can't be who you don't know and who you can't see. So a lot of the research is going to be dependent or determined by what you can see around you. But, you know, cast your net wider, think more broadly, and think of all the people who are here, who may not necessarily be the kind of like classic researchers that you think they are. And maybe I'm trying to sort of like say this particularly for women who want to go into research, and, you know, those from kind of like minority groups who want to go into research.
All good points. The only just one thing on remit. We are a very broad church, as Alison says. Probably the only thing you have to think of is you have to be within the remit of the Wellcome Trust to receive a Wellcome Trust award. But then again, the Wellcome Trust is a pretty broad church, particularly for PhD training. So human animal health. Henry Wellcome's will and testament was a well-written document. Any other questions?
There's no other questions on the chat.
I have a question actually out that the experience has told us that most of you will probably be based in one of our 4 host institutions, but do we have anyone from outside the 4 universities on the meeting?
Hi, I'd like to ask a question as well, but I'm outside. I'm from the Royal Veterinary College of London. My name is Alex Hardes,
Right.
and I'm quite interested in applying. So I'm a senior training scholar in anatomic pathology. So my question is, we talked about a compelling project. So I'd like to ask, how advanced would the proposal be? Meaning, would you favor a proposal that includes preliminary experimental data more than others?
So it has to be, so there are some golden rules here. So it's 3 years as a PhD, pretty much. So you have to be able to achieve it in 3 years. We want to deliver you through to intermediate fellowship. So the outputs have to be compelling enough, cutting edge enough, make enough of a difference to attract outputs that are the launch pad for you for intermediate fellowship. And then tying together what we've said, you know, across all of us, when it comes to things like preliminary data, we wouldn't necessarily expect you to have acquired preliminary data, but it's almost symbolic of the environment that you'd be going into with the comments that Phil's made and Alison about great supervisors. So again, if there's in writing the logic, well, this is a more stage 2 really, but when you get to stage 2 and you're writing your project plan, it's kind of like a common mistake in grant writing. It's not a background section per se, it's constructing an argument for why what you want to do is important and needed. And so sort of pilot data that can go in there from the group that you're looking to work with is, in that sense, as compelling as something that you've done yourself.
Thank you very much. That was crystal clear. Very nice talks also and presentations, very informative and helpful.
So just to say, we have a vet already on the program in Sheffield. So if you wanted to reach out to her, Katie could provide her email, and she's doing a really interesting project. And she didn't know the people before she set the project up, so the pilot data was exactly as Neil said, was provided by the group. But the value is that showed us that the group could do the techniques and apply them to the problem that she was going to work through. So vets are definitely within the welcome program. We've already appointed one. Yep, please apply.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I have already contacted Claire Muir. I think that's the one you mean, but I think she's on maternity leave. So.
Hi, Alex. I actually am one of the supervisors for that project, so I'm very willing if you want to contact me as well, if that helps.
Of course, yeah, that sounds great.
Other questions? What haven't we told you? What have we missed out? This is the feedback form that we would normally have.
I can add something around the, so at the moment we're in between switching between websites. So on the current website, there are now the information that you need around stage 1, stage 2 applications, the deadlines and the guidance. This will also be available on the website, but it won't be until we launch the next one, which might be next week now. But there'll be some other bits and bobs on there as well. So just keep an eye on the website, because there'll be things that pop up over the next couple of weeks. And we're also hoping to run some additional Q&A sessions. So they'll just be for an hour and you can sign up. Hopefully have a couple of directors on there and me and maybe some of the other admin managers. So if you think of any of the questions between now and then, you can just register and pop onto one of those. They'll be quite informal.
I think what might help for those is actually if we could get some questions in advance, we would know the sort of supply and demand aspect of it. When Katie and I were chatting last week about today and the challenge of getting year 5 going with what's going on, actually there is a silver lining that we've all got tooled up on these sort of platforms now over the last few months, and some of the interactions are actually probably a bit easier now than we've had in the past in terms of just running another couple of sessions. And we've sort of had chats about, certainly within the 4 institutions, about, you know, maybe each of us as an institution could do a little local one as well, just to answer queries. the trick for us, obviously, we just want the message out to make it available to as many people as possible across as broad a region as possible to get the best applications. Any other questions? Or are we close to wrapping up?
Just a quick one from me, if I can. James from Newcastle. I'm a dentist by background. Interesting to hear Alex has come to this as from veterinary science, and he got successful vet fellows, or at least one in the past. I just wonder what the perspective is from a dental fellow's point of view, if you've had any recent or past successful fellows from a dental background.
So dentistry is very much in remit. We've had dentists apply. I think I'm right in saying I don't think we've had a dentist who's been appointed on the Wellcome funded places, but we've certainly, I can speak from our local experience, we have lots of dentists coming through PhD pathways and projects. I think the challenge for us locally, I'm not sure whether it's true for you guys in Newcastle, but I think the research strength for us in dentistry in Manchester does include things that would sort of naturally lend itself to a Wellcome style project, but actually a lot of the strength is heavily geared towards NIHR styled applications. Now that's not, I don't want this to sound absolute, and I'm not putting things into pigeonholes, because absolutely I'm not. You know, some of the best candidates I've ever worked with, helping them get onto fellowships. One was a GP who actually got offers from Wellcome. This was before our scheme, but ended up with offers from Wellcome, MRC and NIHR. They cleaned up. So projects can hit multiple funders. I don't want to get the message wrong. But you know, for us locally, there has been a leaning towards NIHR, but then we've helped those people, so it's all been a success.
So I'd just like to add, there's been several dental-based projects awarded CRTFs from the MRC. So I don't think that there is any issue with the more academic projects as well. I think they you know, combine very nicely with your clinical and your patient-based work. And I think, again, we're very open to good projects from whatever background.
I mean, there's some obvious, I don't know what maybe you've already got thoughts, but there's some obvious things that instantly take you into interdisciplinary science and excellence, microbiology, infections, craniofacial development, regeneration. There's you know, even beyond the obvious of clinical research type studies. So again, when you start to think about these things and what we've described in terms of interdisciplinarity and excellence across such a wide range, you know, there are really exciting projects to dream up on this sort of stuff.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful.
Other questions, or are we wrapping it up? Katie, on any last entries on the chat channel?
Nothing on the chat channel.
Okay. Well, look. So I'm gonna just to pull it together then. Thank you very much to all the to the directors, Alison, Phil, Muzz. Thanks to Sunaina for a presentation, giving a flavour of what, you know, past awardees get up to. Hopefully we've got the message across that we're your advocates. You know, you are the next generation of people coming through. There's probably it's a good harbinger if you're on the call that if you stick at it, you'll get success somewhere, somehow. I know it can feel a bit daunting at times, but this is the scheme we've described. Yes, it's Wellcome funded, but we are passionate about getting people onto PhD programs, wherever that may be. Like Alison, I've sat on the MRC panel, and so it's in many ways, it's a pleasure to work with you all. Inevitably, though, we do have to, we're on the other side of the fence as the people who judge you to a large extent as well. But, you know, I think that first bit of wanting to bring you through, encourage you, get you onto PhDs and make your careers thrive is the best bit. So, good. We'll set up some local stuff. Follow the website as we transition onto the new site. But those key dates that we showed at the start, Katie, remind me when the closing date for stage 1?
Oh gosh, now you're asking. 11th of November. Yeah.
11th of November. Plenty of time. Good. Thank you very much, everyone, for your help. Thank you for Katie, Joe, Jodie for organising.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.